was sick.
Valley mother who was shot and killed along with 3 of her children was a refugee who fled violence in Myanmar. Police believe Boumé and the children were killed by her husband. They also think he then shot himself. The couple's 17-year-old son survived. He's in the hospital with a severe brain injury. Boumé was a member of an ethnic minority. She fled what relatives call ethnic cleansing about 10 years ago. Family members say she and her small family came to the U.S. with little more than the clothes on their backs. A new rapid bus transit line is coming to Salt Lake County. The Utah Transit Authority will receive nearly $63 million in federal funding for the new Mid-Valley Express. It'll run 7 miles with 15 stations through Murray, Taylorsville, and West Valley City. At either end of the line, commuters will be able to connect to Front Runner and Trax. The Federal Transit Administration says it'll improve accessibility to a regional mall, medical center, community college, and dense residential areas. They also say it'll help prepare the city for the 2034 Olympic Games. Public lands groups and communities across Utah are asking residents to help with the annual Christmas bird count. As KUER's David Condos reports, the nationwide count is marking its 125th anniversary.
Research suggests that North America has nearly 3 billion fewer birds today than it did 5 decades ago. And rising temperatures and development are likely to impact even more of their habitat in the future. That's why having more eyes and ears to spot birds is so important. Danielle Finlayson is a biologist with the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. She'll lead the count in Cedar City.
You're surveying the same spot every year in the exact same time frame, and that kind of data is just really useful, especially when you have a data set that goes back so far.
She says the count isn't just about getting more people interested in birds. The data is also essential to scientists. Biologist Macy Monahan will lead the count at Bryce Canyon National Park.
Birds are really great indicator species, so monitoring their population dynamics is a good indicator for stressors in the environment like climate change or ecosystem health.
She says that can inform conservation actions the park should take to help with all kinds of wildlife. For KUER News, I'm David Condos in St. George.
There's more information about this year's bird count locations at utahbirds.org. Some Utah County residents and businesses can now get a better idea of their flood risk. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has approved an updated flood map for the shoreline of Utah Lake and along the Provo River. But the public can make comments and appeals through March 18th. FEMA says the new maps will help building officials, contractors, and homeowners when it comes to reducing flood damage. It says updates are made because of things like weather, erosion, and community development. These changes could impact what can be built in the areas and insurance requirements. You're listening to KUER News.
It got quiet. Okay, really?
Discussed immigration and housing during his year-end news conference today. KUER's Sean Higgins has more.
Cox announced in November that he would be working with the incoming Trump administration to deport immigrants who have entered the country illegally and committed crimes. Trump pledged to deport millions of people during his campaign, but Cox told reporters that nothing has been decided.
We have not had any discussions about the details of any of this. Trump has said a lot of things, and we'll wait until we have those discussions.
Cox also said he's going to focus on Utah's housing affordability crisis in the upcoming legislative session. That would include legislation on how the state can encourage more construction of owner-occupied condominium units in the future.
We've had a problem in the West and in Utah. We don't build condominiums as much anymore. We know the demand is there. But it's what's stopping the supply, and that's, you'll see some more of that this legislative session.
The governor also said his second term in office would be his last. Sean Higgins, KUER News.
President Joe Biden signed legislation today to allow so-called Good Samaritans to clean up abandoned hard rock mines. Utah Representative Celeste Malloy sponsored the bipartisan legislation. It allows groups to remediate the mines on federal land. At the same time, those groups will not face any liabilities for the pollution that's already there. Chris Wood is the CEO of Crouch Unlimited.
And then we can do the work, and as long as we do what we said we did, and we didn't make it worse, we in fact made it better, we can walk away. And that's what makes this legislation so significant.
Some of the mines leach chemicals like arsenic and lead into waterways. The bill sets up a pilot program under the Environmental Protection Agency. It will start with 15 projects over the next 7 years. Utah Tech University is making new efforts to find a president. It's been under the helm of an interim president for almost a year, but now the school has a 10-member committee tasked with the search. They hope to have someone picked by March. The committee says they want someone who will keep the university's mission and boundaries and show professionalism. Multiple news outlets have reported that former President Richard Biff Williams contributed to a toxic culture. He announced his resignation last December and became president of Missouri State University this July. Utah Lake has too many carp, and officials with the Utah Lake Authority say anglers can help with the problem. Throughout 2025, fishing teams that catch the most carp can compete to win up to $5,000. The fish were introduced to the lake in the 1880s, but their aggressive foraging has hurt the health of the lake and impacted native species. About 75% of the carp have been removed since 2009. But officials say it's still not enough. You're listening to KUER News.
From KUER News in Salt Lake City, I'm Ciara Hewlett. The Utah Education Association is challenging the constitutionality of the state's new voucher program. They say it violates the requirement of a free and open public education, but the state disagrees. Both sides were in court yesterday, and KUER's Martha Harris has more.
The Utah Fits All Scholarship gives a limited number of families up to $8,000 of public funding to spend on educational expenses. Third District Judge Laura Scott wanted the parties to drill down on how to interpret relevant voter-approved amendments, including Amendment G. In 2020, it opened up state income tax dollars to be used not just on education, but services for children and people with disabilities. The plaintiff's attorney, Ramya Ravendran, argued it was presented as focusing on social services.
And the impact that physical and mental health on children can have on learning outcomes, and therefore this is a narrow expansion of the permissible uses of income tax revenue.
But State Attorney Scott Reither said the amendment was clear, and the voter information pamphlet mentioned vouchers.
That is a direct warning to the voters that they are opening this provision of the Constitution to allow uses of income tax revenues other than for public education.
It's part of why the state wants the case to be dismissed. Judge Scott said she'll likely rule by the end of January. Martha Harris, KUER News.
The West Valley mother who was shot and killed along with 3 of her children was a refugee who fled violence in Myanmar. Police believe Boumé and the children were killed by her husband. They also think he then shot himself. The couple's 17-year-old son survived. He's in the hospital with a severe brain injury. Boumé was a member of an ethnic minority. She fled what relatives call ethnic cleansing about 10 years ago. Family members say she and her small family came to the U.S. with little more than the clothes on their backs. A new rapid bus transit line is coming to Salt Lake County. The Utah Transit Authority will receive nearly $63 million in federal funding for the new Mid-Valley Express. It'll run 7 miles with 15 stations through Murray, Taylorsville, and West Valley City. At either end of the line, commuters will be able to connect to Front Runner and Trax. The Federal Transit Administration says it'll improve accessibility to a regional mall, medical center, community college, and dense residential areas. They also say it'll help prepare the city for the 2034 Olympic Games. Public lands groups and communities across Utah are asking residents to help with the annual Christmas bird count.
Top.
As KUER's David Condos reports, the nationwide count is marking its 125th anniversary.
Research suggests that North America has nearly 3 billion fewer birds today than it did 5 decades ago. And rising temperatures and development are likely to impact even more of their habitat in the future. That's why having more eyes and ears to spot birds is so important. Danielle Finlayson is a biologist with the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. She'll lead the count in Cedar City.
You're surveying the same spot every year in the exact same time frame, and that kind of data is just really useful, especially when you have a data set that goes back so far.
She says the count isn't just about getting more people interested in birds. The data is also essential to scientists. Biologist Macy Monahan will lead the count at Bryce Canyon National Park.
Birds are really great indicator species, so monitoring their population dynamic is a good indicator for stressors in the environment like climate change or ecosystem health.
She says that can inform conservation actions the park should take to help with all kinds of wildlife. For KUER News, I'm David Condos in St. George.
There's more information about this year's bird count locations at utahbirds.org. Some Utah County residents and businesses can now get a better idea of their flood risk. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has approved an...
The fate of the Uinta Basin Railway is heading to the U.S. Supreme Court. As KUER's Sean Higgins reports, the 90-mile railway would connect the oil-rich basin with existing rail lines in central Utah.
If built, it's estimated that up to 350,000 barrels of Black Sea crude oil could be shipped to the Gulf Coast daily. The project was halted in 2023 after a federal appeals court ruled a critical environmental impact statement was rushed and violated the law. Dita Seed is a senior campaigner for the Center for Biological Diversity.
Analyzing the environmental consequences of building the railroad without analyzing what happens when the oil arrives is like diving headfirst into a pool without checking how deep the water is.
The Seven County Infrastructure Coalition is one of the organizations behind the railway. Executive Director Keith Heaton believes the environmental work was done properly and looks forward to clarity from the court, no matter the outcome.
We're talking hundreds of thousands of pages of documentation that went into this, looking at a lot of different aspects of it. And at some point you do have to draw the line on what you can look at.
The Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on December 10th. Sean Higgins, KUER News.
The average price for gasoline in Utah is now $3 a gallon. That's down 2 cents from last week, according to AAA. It's also below the national average of $3.03. The last time the national average was below $3 a gallon was May of 2021. Data from the Energy Information Administration also shows demand for gasoline rose slightly last week, but production went down. The America the Beautiful Challenge aims to conserve at least 30% of U.S. lands and waters by 2030. More than $120 million in grants are earmarked to support programs that include indigenous perspectives. Brian Melendez is CEO of the Nevada-based nonprofit Tribal Minds.
We have to be more conscious and aware of the way that we take care of our waters. how we take care of our air that we're breathing, how do we take care of the waste that is being created from the exploitation of the land.
Tribal communities in Nevada, Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah will receive funds for projects ranging from cleaning up rivers to protecting wildlife. Utah State University has a new football coach. Bronco Mendenhall has agreed to a 6-year deal. He comes to the Aggies from New Mexico. Before coaching the Lobos, Mendenhall spent 6 seasons at Virginia and 11 seasons at Brigham Young University. Previous USU coach Blake Anderson was fired in July. The school accused him of non-compliance with university rules around reporting sexual misconduct. The Aggies went 4-8 this past season. Mendenhall gained a reputation for quickly turning around programs during his time at BYU and Virginia. American and Utah flags will be lowered to half-staff tomorrow in honor of Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day. It's been 83 years since the surprise attack killed more than 2,000 Americans in Hawaii on December 7th. The United States entered World War II after the bombing raid. Governor Spencer Cox ordered the flags to be lowered. He also invited residents, businesses, and organizations to participate in the Day of Remembrance. A dinosaur with ties to Utah will be on display in New York starting this weekend. The giant stegosaurus known as Apex was found near the Utah-Colorado border. Apex is 11 feet tall and 27 feet long, and it's one of the most complete stegosaurus fossils. About 80% of its bones are preserved. It's also the most expensive. Over the summer, it was sold for almost $45 million. It's currently on loan to the American Museum of Natural History. You are listening to KUER News.
From KUER News in Salt Lake City, I'm Ciara Hewlett. Utah Congressman Blake Moore will be one of 3 co-chairs in the new Delivering Outstanding Government Efficiency Caucus. The group will work with the Department of Government Efficiency, also known as DOGE. Billionaires Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy will lead the organization. Moore posted a picture with them on social media last week. He said he's excited to cut federal waste, fraud, and abuse. President-elect Donald Trump announced the organization last month. Utah wants 70% of 3rd grade students reading at grade level by 2027. But as KUER's Martha Harris reports, there's still room for improvement.
Lawmakers set the benchmark in 2022. They also invested millions of dollars to get there, like teaching educators the science of reading. Julie Clark is the State Board of Education's Literacy and Early Learning Coordinator. She says only 48% of 3rd graders were reading at grade level at the end of last school year.
Our 1st graders moved a little bit. Our 2nd and our 3rd graders stayed very stagnant. It was about exactly the same as where we were at the year before. So we've kind of hit a plateau.
Jennifer Thronson is the former director of teaching and learning at the State Board of Education. For the state to reach its goal, she says there needs to be ongoing professional development as well as coaching and support for teachers.
What we're missing is implementation. So we've got knowledge, we've built knowledge in our teachers. At this time, what we need to focus on is holding our teachers accountable and giving them the supports they need to implement their knowledge.
Still, Clark is encouraged by the progress kindergarten students made during the last school year. That group will be in 3rd grade in 2027, and she thinks it's possible they can hit the 70% goal. Martha Harris, KUER News.
A former Iron County law enforcement officer could face criminal charges. The St. George News reports Jeff Humphreys resigned last week amid allegations of hazing and creating a hostile work environment. He was a lieutenant with the Iron County Sheriff's Office. Humphreys is accused of handcuffing and physically assaulting officers. And there are claims he falsely told some officers they were under investigation. Others were allegedly given unwarranted psychological tests. He was placed on administrative leave more than 6 weeks ago. Humphreys resigned the same day he was scheduled to attend a hearing to address the findings of an investigation into his conduct. Toys with small magnets can be dangerous for young children. Doctors at Intermountain Primary Children's Hospital are warning parents about the health risks if magnets are ingested. Lori Bauman is a trauma surgeon.
When they are swallowed and they move through the intestines at different rates, they can come together but in 2 separate pieces of the intestine. And what that does is it'll pinch the intestine together between the magnets.
That can lead to bowel obstruction and infection, and that could lead to surgery. Doctors say button batteries in toys are also risky. They can burn the esophagus if swallowed. Both magnets and batteries have lasting effects on the health of children even after they're removed. BYU's football team will play in the Alamo Bowl against the Colorado Buffaloes. It'll be on December 28th in Texas. Kalani Sitake is the Cougars head coach.
I'm really excited about the matchup that we have against Colorado and Coach Prime. I've known Dion and been able to interact with him, and I'm a big fan of his. It's been fun to be able to watch him and him lead his team this year.
And University of Utah head coach Kyle Whittingham will return next year. He announced on social media yesterday, "We are back in 2025. The statement came amid speculation about his retirement on a low note. The Utes won 2 conference games this season and had a streak of 7 losses. You're listening to KUER News.
From KUER News in Salt Lake City, I'm Pamela McCall. Syrians in Utah have been monitoring the situation in their homeland following the ouster of Bashir al-Assad. 24-year-old Sam Bari was born in Damascus. He fled the fighting in Syria with his parents and 2 brothers in 2011. The University of Utah business student says the local Syrian community is celebrating Assad's demise.
We've dreamt of this day. We've lost so many friends, so many family members. 2 days ago marked the end of this sad story. It was the last page of an intense book that nobody wants to read.
Bari says his cousin was killed in Syria in 2015 and his uncle has been missing for the last 7 years. He remains hopeful that his uncle will emerge from one of Syria's notorious prisons now that the insurgents are freeing prisoners. The Utah legislature has reached a new milestone for the number of women representing the state. KUER's Sage Miller has more.
Over the weekend, Utah County Republicans elected Kristen Chevrier to replace Brady Brammer, who is headed to the state Senate. She beat 2 other candidates for the House District 54 spot. Overall, female lawmakers make up almost a third of the Utah legislative body, which is the most the legislature has ever seen. Susan Madsen is the director of the Utah Women in Leadership Project. While she's celebrating the gains, she'd like to see more women in policymaking.
30% is really that tipping point when it starts to make a difference, a real difference. But most of the literature really talks about when you get into that 40-60, there's a better feel of equality.
Still, Utah ranks 41st in the nation for female representation in state legislatures. Sage Miller, KUER News.
The Salt Lake City Police Department is urging people to stop leaving their keys or key fobs inside their cars, even for a brief time. 13 thefts or attempts to steal Hyundai and Kia vehicles have recently been reported, especially in the Rose Park area. The incidents happened between November 23rd and last Friday. Windows are being broken in order for the thieves to steal the vehicles. Steering columns and ignition switches are also being damaged. The department says anyone seeing suspicious activity should call 911. A polygamous religious leader has been sentenced to 50 years in prison. Samuel Bateman pleaded guilty to coercing girls as young as 9 to submit to criminal sex act with him and other adults. His plea agreement had called for 20 to 50 years in prison, though each conviction carried a possible life sentence. Bateman declared himself a prophet, the small offshoot of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The same group was once led by Warren Jeffs. A Wyoming man who was found in Salt Lake City after going missing has died. 91-year-old Michael Black suffered from dementia. He had been gone for 3 days when his wife, Avril, spotted him in a KSL News segment. He spotlighted a homeless shelter before Thanksgiving. After returning home, Black fell ill with the flu. His wife said he died under home hospice care. The couple was married for 47 years. You are listening to KUER News.
From KUER News in Salt Lake City, I'm Ciara Hewlett. Utah has a new plan to get more educators into the classroom. It's called the Utah Registered Apprenticeship Program for Teachers. The Utah State Board of Education says the competency-based initiative is a way for people who don't yet have a bachelor's degree to get into the profession. The paid program gives participants mentorship, help with college tuition, and, at the end, a teaching license. Officials say the aim is to help people who want to be teachers overcome barriers. The program will work with some of the state's colleges and universities, as well as a number of school districts, to hire participants. Utah has a child care crisis. That's according to a new report from the legislature. It outlines some recommendations state leaders can take next year to beef up the workforce. They include child care subsidies for people who work in child care programs, wage grants for licensed child care workers, and tax credits for businesses and their employees with child care needs. According to the report, nearly 70% of Utah mothers with children under 6 are working, and about 60% of children under 6 have 2 working parents. But getting child care in the state can be tough. One reason is that the job doesn't pay very much and offers few benefits. About 20% of child care workers have multiple jobs. Groundwater resources in the West are drying up. A new study says that's due to unsustainable farming practices and rising demand for food production. The Mountain West News Bureau's Kayla Bradle has more.
In the West, farmers rely heavily on groundwater for irrigation. They use it to grow produce and raise livestock to meet the food demands of the U.S. and the world. But groundwater is being used much faster than it's being replenished. In some regions, supplies that took a decade to build up are being withdrawn in a single year.
That's how rapid and fast people are depleting groundwater.
That's Iman Haikiki. He's a researcher at Purdue University and the study's lead author.
There are alarming rates of the number of drying wells in the West. You see, they are not usable anymore.
He says that's why states may start limiting farmers' access to groundwater. He adds that policymakers should consider how climate change will impact future supplies as temperatures rise and precipitation declines. But he warns that groundwater cutbacks could have economic ripple effects, causing crop production in the U.S. to shrink and food prices to skyrocket. For the Mountain West News Bureau, I'm Caleb.
Less than 15% of Salt Lake City businesses are owned by women. That's one of the lowest rates in the U.S. But the Maven district at 900 South and 200 East is bucking that trend. It's attracted mostly women-owned businesses. Rocky Donati is a co-founder of the district. In an episode of CNBC's program Cities of Success, she says they've created a special ecosystem there.
Real estate provides a path for wealth growth in a different way for women that we don't always have access to, and the services provide those resources to support our team.
The Salt Lake City installment of the CNBC program airs tonight at 8. It also includes interviews with people from government and businesses like Smith Entertainment Group and Adobe. A Utah school voucher program now has an executive director. Micah Hirokawa will head up the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program. He'll oversee the application process and how funds are used. The program started this year. It gives up to $8,000 per student for things like private school tuition and tutoring. Lawmakers approved just over $42 million for the program. Families with incomes up to twice the federal poverty level will have priority. Hirokawa has worked in education in a number of roles, including teacher, principal, and charter superintendent. You're listening to KUER News.
From KUER News in Salt Lake City, I'm Pamela McCall. The Supreme Court appeared to favor overturning a lower court decision blocking construction of Utah's Uinta Basin Railway during oral arguments today. KUER's Sean Higgins has more.
If built, the 88-mile railway could transport an estimated 350,000 barrels of waxy crude oil a day. In 2023, a federal appeals court ruled that an environmental impact statement was insufficient and violated the law. Lawyer Paul Clement said the lower court overstepped its interpretation of what the National Environmental Policy Act requires.
In classic no good deed goes unpunished fashion, the D.C. Circuit held that because the agency identified the issue or flagged the issue, it was therefore foreseeable and they had to do more.
But justices appeared skeptical of Clement, asking them to narrow what NEPA can consider. Justice Sonia Sotomayor asked opponents if NEPA even has the authority to look beyond the railroad's construction when weighing environmental impacts.
Why is it within their purview to say or determine what the increase of refining will be and whether it'll be damaging when there's another agency that has the power to control that?
Lawyer William Jay called that reasoning inconsistent with what NEPA requires. A ruling is expected next summer. Sean Higgins, KUER News.
President-elect Donald Trump wants to deport millions of people living in the U.S. illegally, and Republican-led states are rolling out plans to help him do that. KUER's Brian Larson has more.
The Department of Homeland Security estimates 11 million unauthorized immigrants lived in the U.S. as of 2022. Utah Governor Spencer Cox recently announced a new initiative to work with federal officials to identify undocumented immigrants in the criminal justice system and deport them. Earlier this year, Georgia passed a law that requires jailers to check on the immigration status of inmates. And in Arizona, voters approved a ballot measure letting police arrest migrants suspected of illegally entering from Mexico. But that won't kick in until a similar law in Texas has been in effect for 60 days. For now, the Texas law is on hold. Brian Larson, KUER News.
The Salt Lake Chamber says there are more signs from November that Utah's economy is on the up and up. The Chamber, along with the Kim C. Gardner Policy Institute, says there are 3 reasons to be cautiously optimistic. 1, inflation is dropping below levels seen earlier this year. 2, median home sale prices were at a 5-month high in October. And 3, consumer sentiment reached its highest level since June of 2021. But there are still headwinds, such as policy uncertainty, labor shortages, and overconfidence in the stock market. The projected number 1 pick for the 2026 NBA draft has committed to Brigham Young University. A.J. Diebensaw announced his decision on ESPN's First Take today. Diebensaw said BYU basketball head coach Kevin Young's experience coaching stars like Kevin Durant and Devin Booker helped solidify his decision. Coach Young joined the Cougars earlier this year and set a goal to turn the team into an NBA pipeline. Diebensaw is one of the 3 highest-rated recruits in BYU basketball history. All 3 were brought in by Coach Young. You are listening to KUER News.
From KUER News in Salt Lake City, I'm Ciara Hewlett. Midvale City has a new mayor. Dustin Gettle was appointed by the City Council last night. Gettle has been on the council for almost 7 years. He says he'll prioritize revitalizing Main Street and focus on uniting the community. Midvale projects he's been a part of include a paid parental and caregiver leave program for city employees and citywide glass recycling. Gettle replaces former mayor Marcus Stevenson. Stevenson resigned last month. He said his personal life had recently changed drastically. In St. George, some schools, parks, and homes still use drinking water to irrigate grass. KUER's David Condos has more on efforts to change that.
A crane lifts a giant piece of pink pipeline over a trench dug in the road in the middle of a St. George neighborhood. It's part of a $2.8 million project to connect this part of the city to a secondary water system that's meant for irrigation. Scott Taylor is the water services manager.
Those 2 parks and the 1 school consume about 10 million gallons of water a year on their outside watering. So that'll be able to free that up for culinary water.
Basically, as the city stops watering grass with culinary or drinking water, that leaves more of it for kitchen sinks. Zach Renstrom is general manager of the County Water Conservancy District. He says it's an example of the many steps in the county's plan to sustain water supplies into the 2040s.
We have $100 million projects and we have a couple $1 million projects, but they're all required to make sure we reach our 20-year goal.
This project is expected to be done by the middle of next year. And eventually, these secondary connections will reuse water from the city's wastewater recycling plant. For KUER News, I'm David Condos in St. George.
Salt Lake City has released 3 designs for what its ballpark site could look like. It expects to move forward with a final design early next year. The first plan preserves the 13.5 acres as a spot for sport. The stadium would stay in place, and the area could also be used for farmers markets and festivals. The second plan is a cultural center. The green spaces would be used for performances, sporting events, and festivals. The third plan focuses on nature and creates pocket parks with playgrounds. The city began re-envisioning the site after the Salt Lake Bees announced a move to Daybreak. You're listening to KUER News.
From KUER News in Salt Lake City, I'm Pamela McCall. The Salt Lake City School Board has unanimously reaffirmed its commitment to support students and families, regardless of their immigration status. KUER's Martha Harris has more.
The board originally passed a resolution in 2017 outlining its practices to protect immigrant students during Donald Trump's first term in office, and reaffirmed them in 2019. And now, with Trump's promise of mass deportations during a second term, Board member Jenny Sika asked them to reaffirm it again.
I would just like for us to emphasize and just reach out to these families to make sure that this is a safe space. This is a safe school district, and that we are here to protect them and their families.
The district says it will not ask students or parents about their immigration status, and that it will do everything in its power to protect the legal rights of students. The resolution has been sent to all schools in the district. Martha Harris, KUER News.
Salt Lake City is another step closer to getting a Major League Baseball team and stadium. The City Council approved creating the Jordan River Fair Park District yesterday. The plan calls for affordable housing, better access to the Jordan River, and infrastructure upgrades, and about 100 acres on the city's west side. The Utah legislature paved the way for a partnership between the city and the Learn H. Miller Company to build up that area of the city earlier this year. Major League Baseball has not announced any expansion teams. 2 federal agents in Utah allegedly sold drugs known as bath salts through an informant. David Cole and a second unnamed person are with the Department of Homeland Security. Their scheme brought in up to $300,000 according to court records. The drugs allegedly were seized as evidence in another investigation. The informant was recruited for legitimate work, buying drugs. But the agents also allegedly used that person for illegal drug sales. Both have had their credentials suspended, but they have not been fired. Cole made a court appearance on Monday. He will be arraigned on December 20th in Salt Lake City. Our eyes may be the windows to the soul, but tears can provide clues about a person's health. Certain proteins contained in tears can be used to detect diseases like glaucoma, breast cancer, and Alzheimer's. But collecting the right kind of tears can be tricky. So researchers at Brigham Young University developed a special contact lens that can help. Ken Christensen is a chemistry and biochemistry professor at BYU.
Our goal was really not to collect reflex tears like that you might get from like cutting an onion or, poking yourself in the eye, but rather to collect kind of those steady state or basal tears.
That's because reflex tears dilute the proteins that indicate disease. Volunteers wore the contacts for 5 minutes, and the process did not require an optometrist. Christensen says they were able to collect almost as much information as other testing methods. You are listening to KUER News.
From KUER News in Salt Lake City, I'm Ciara Hewlett. The nation's first female senator now has a statue on display at the U.S. Capitol. Utah's Martha Hughes Cannon was elected in 1861. Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson attended yesterday's dedication ceremony. She said this highlights Cannon's legacy in the women's rights movement.
Martha is both a real woman and a representation of who we are and what we value as Utahns and Americans. Martha means something to all of us.
Cannon was an immigrant to Utah from the United Kingdom. She's also known for her roles as a doctor, a suffragist, and a public health reformer. Her figure replaces television inventor Philo Farnsworth as Utah's second statue at the Capitol. There are at least 140,000 abandoned hard rock mines on federal lands, and tens of thousands of them pose a risk to the environment. A bill introduced by Utah Representative Celeste Malloy to make their cleanup easier has cleared its final hurdle in Congress. The Mountain West News Bureau's Rachel Cohen has more.
Volunteers face obstacles when they want to clean up these sites, which can leach toxic chemicals like arsenic into water. Rules hold them responsible for the pollution old mining companies left behind.
Historically, the fear of litigation and liability that might trail a would-be Good Samaritan has kept us from doing a lot of that cleanup work.
Chris Wood is the CEO of Trout Unlimited. He's been working to change this for 2 decades. And finally, this week, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a bipartisan bill. It creates a pilot program under the Environmental Protection Agency that allows nonprofits and governments to clean up old mines without taking on the risks. It starts with 15 projects over the next 7 years. The bill now heads to President Biden's desk. For the Mountain West News Bureau, I'm Rachel Cohen.
The Sundance Film Festival lineup is out. 87 feature films will debut at the annual event for movie lovers. They include a musical, Kiss of the Spider-Woman, starring Jennifer Lopez, and a documentary from Questlove about Sly and the Family Stone. Sundance kicks off in Park City on January 23rd, but people won't need to be in town to catch the flicks. Many of them will be available online for ticket buyers. The festival has been in Utah for 41 years, but starting in 2027, it could move out of state. Boulder, Colorado, and Cincinnati, Ohio are the other 2 places in the running. An announcement is expected early next year. The Utah Division of Wildlife Resources stocked nearly 13 million fish statewide this year. That's over 2 million more than the total from 2023. The DWR releases hatchery-raised fish into natural bodies of water each year to increase the populations of native fish. Officials say without stocking, fishing in Utah would be limited, and it helps recover endangered fish species. Efforts like stocking helped the June sucker get downlisted from endangered to threatened in 2021. You're listening to KUER News.
From KUER News in Salt Lake City, I'm Pamela McCall. A parade of fast-moving storm systems will impact Utah starting tonight through early next week. KUER's El Crossley has more on what to expect.
The National Weather Service predicts the central and northern mountains could get 2 to 6 inches of snow overnight. Light snow is forecast for the northern Utah valleys, which could have a minor impact on the Friday morning commute. A second storm will move in Saturday night into Sunday. Snow totals in the mountains could be heavier than the first storm, but are still expected to be on the lighter side. Mostly rain will fall for the valley. As for next week, forecasters say it's still too early to tell. El Crossley, KUER News.
The Utah National Guard is getting a new infantry battalion. More than 760 additional soldiers will be added by late 2028. That's when the unit is expected to have all of its personnel and equipment in place. Officials say the battalion will boost Utah's economy and help with recruitment and retention. Utah Guard units respond to state and national missions. They're made up of citizens who serve as a combat reserve for the U.S. Army and Air Force. The defacing of an ancient petroglyph near Kanab, Utah last month received national attention, but there are more unintentional ways visitors can damage sacred places. Elizabeth Hora is public archaeologist with the Utah State Historic Preservation Office. She says walking off a trail could harm sites that have not been studied.
These are sensitive places on the landscape. It takes a really soft touch for humans to leave their trace there. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to us when we as modern people go to these same places and we leave behind traces of our touch as well.
Another example would be finding an artifact and bringing it back to a ranger station. While that might seem helpful, Hora says it's better to leave it so scientists can study artifacts where they lie. The Utah Division of Wildlife Resources stocked nearly 13 million fish statewide this year. You are listening to KUER News.
From KUER News.
Alright. This is where I'm going to turn it off. Bye. Bye, guys. I'll see you tomorrow at sunrise. 6 a.m.